Nancy Murray is a playwright, a storyteller, a friend, a theater director, whose plays I still remember after having seen like 800 Baltimore Playwrights Festivals plays. And she's now pursuing an MFA in creative writing and the publishing arts and the University of Baltimore. Nancy writes a weekly blog with the Baltimore Post-Examiner entitled The Balance Beam. Nancy, thank you very much.
Hello. I'm just going to read from the blog at the Baltimore Post-Examiner. The blog has been an interesting exercise for me because while I've been writing for most of my life, one of the things I've pretty consistently done is hide all my writing in drawers and never put them out there. So this has been last year's resolution was that I was going to put myself out there more, and now I am out there every week with the blog. It's a musings about a person who has grown up in Baltimore, and I should make the note that I am almost 50 years old, and I've only been here for 6 years, but I did indeed grow up in Baltimore. So I'll start at the beginning. I read a lot of books about balance and well-being. Usually I'm reading them in a very messy house, while the laundry is weeping for lack of attention, and more often than not I'm a tad hungover when I read them. But the act of reading spiritual books makes me feel like I really have my act together. It also gives me an upper hand when it comes to cocktail party banter. As the political rhetoric escalates, I can go all zen on my conversation counterparts by bringing things right back to a uniform, head nodding, shoulders shrugging acceptance of the fact that everything is as it is. It sure is satisfying to have wisdom in the archives of this big brain of mine, even if I don't actually use it in my daily practice. But every once in a while, something I read hits home. About 7 years ago, I read a book called The Dance of Balance by Annie Payne. It was about energies, specifically Feng Shui, and how to apply the principles of Feng Shui to your everyday life and not just to your room decor. I was living in a Maryland suburb at the time, and despite my considerable age and experience, I was nursing my very first broken heart. It was during that crazed, pacing, 1 minute, lying catatonic, the next phase of being dumped, that I wisely reached out for help in the form of the written word. The essence of the book is that if life is out of balance and you want to change it, then you need to start with changing or activating the energy of your environment. Apparently, this can be done by moving stuff around. If I wanted to turn things around in my life, the book implied, and I did, I needed to turn things around in my living room. After a long meditation, I decided to find 10 things that I could move on purpose to create a happier energy. The first few things were obvious. They related to a general cleaning up. Once that was done, I moved deeper into my situation, and I realized that the moving of objects can be representative of more significant action. As I moved pictures and put away tchotchke that reminded me of what was gone, I began the practice of letting go. I had moved 9 things on purpose, and I felt a deep satisfaction knowing that I was cleansing my life of that negative past. I had only one more item to move, and I wanted to make sure that it would turn my attention away from the past and toward the future. What could I move that would bring a more positive energy into my life? It's an excellent question, and I recommend anyone ask it of themselves at any time. I got a cup of tea, and I sat down by my window to have a think on it when I noticed that a real estate agent outside was setting up an open house for the place across the street. In a flash, I knew. The 10th thing I needed to move was me. I ran for a piece of paper and a marker, and I made a sign that said, "For sale by owner, open today." And I taped it to the window where anyone looking at the other house would see it. That very afternoon, a contract was ratified. Note, this was before the bubble burst. I sat in my freshly arranged and rearranged living room with a signed contract in my hand and a belly full of butterflies. I knew exactly where I was going to go. I had only been to Baltimore 2 times in my life. Once to a bar in Fells Point, and while my friends and I drank and danced, someone smashed the window out of our car and stole our sound system. The other time, I came to be a part of the 48-Hour Film Festival, which was being launched in Hamden. The 48-Hour Film Festival is as it sounds, a festival in which participants create a film in 48 hours. I had joined with a friend who wanted to give it a try, but the night of the opening, he was waylaid by a badly behaved kidney stone. We had to step out of the competition, but not before I had gotten a taste of the quirks and the quaintness of this little town in the middle of the city. Hamden called to me in a quiet whisper every single day after that, but my life was too busy and cluttered to hear the call until one day, while desperately trying to heal my broken heart, I took the time to move a few things around. I'm going to go right to the next one. Anyone who has been in love knows that the experience is a lot like being drunk. People in love behave rashly and impulsively. They ignore glaringly obvious warning signs and charge headlong into the unknown with the confidence of a bull seeing red. Being in love is a form of psychosis. Love, on the other hand, is what happens, hopefully, after the in-love passes. When the dust settles and reality returns home from its little vacation in the land of pheromones, hormones, and mutual admiration. In love is a feeling we get when the object of our affection makes us believe, ever so briefly, that we are amazing, beautiful, talented, funny mini gods who are capable of anything. That feeling fades as soon as the object of our affection notices with a crinkling nose that we fart. Only when the object of our affection disappoints us, and we them, can we begin to learn the true meaning of love. All this profound wisdom came to me as the moving truck pulled into Baltimore. I had spent the entire month prior to moving day in a rose-colored haze of infatuation. I strolled up and down the avenue, introducing my old DC friends to my new love. Day after day, I walked into the enchanting shops and galleries, chatting with the charming storekeepers who welcomed me with open hearts. I took family and friends to poetry readings at the Minas Gallery. We laughed and marveled at the unique selection of items at Mud and Metal. We sipped tea in the common ground and strolled through the neighborhoods of stone mill houses and artists' gardens. My friends agreed. I had chosen well. I beamed with pride at my thoroughly adorable new home. When my daughters came to the house for the first time, I was sure they would be as thrilled as I was, but they're protective of me, and they eyed my new love with suspicion. Through their eyes, I became acutely aware of the litter, the pregnant teens, the drug addicts, and I began to wonder, with a feeling growing into panic, what I had done. My youngest, Shannon, said, "Mommy, you can't live here. Baltimore's going to hurt your heart." I winced, because on some level I knew she was right. This world was very different than the neat and tidy suburban world that I grew up in and where I raised my kids. But like any person in love would do at a time like this, I denied it. I made excuses and assurances that what she was seeing was a fluke, a random event, not at all representative of what was really happening. I played the downside down, and I extolled the virtues of city living. I showed them how many art galleries were right on my block, how I could walk to anything I could imagine wanting. I introduced them to musicians, to fire dancers, to puppeteers, and more. We toured MICA, the BMA, and the Walters Art Gallery. They were impressed, but when we came home, there were police lights flashing on my block, and 3 cops handcuffed a young man who was face down on the ground right in front of my house. My girls exchanged a knowing glance. When they left, I was crushed and more than a little bit frightened. I had just given up everything I knew and understood in exchange for the possibility of happiness. But now that I was committed, I realized that my love had flaws, and some of those flaws were potentially dangerous ones. I had what we in the real estate business call buyer's remorse. When things are difficult for me, I find it helpful to think of others, as in, others feel the same way, or what do others do when faced with this problem? Making a problem less personal makes it more manageable. It occurred to me that there were probably others who had just moved into the neighborhood, and perhaps they too were sitting in stunned silence with tears in their eyes in their living rooms. The good news is that I was a real estate agent at the time, and I knew just how to find out who they were. I went to the MLS system and I looked up every single person who purchased their homes in the last 19 days, which was exactly 1 day less than I had been in Baltimore. I went to each of their houses and dropped cards in their mailboxes, inviting them to my house for a welcome to the neighborhood happy hour. They didn't know. Every single one of them came to that party, and over the next few months and years, we as a group explored, embraced, and learned to love our Baltimore in the truest sense of the word. Since I think it would be tedious to just read every one of the blog pieces all the way up until the current time, and since we only have 15 minutes, I'll jump ahead. I was a terrible revolutionary. I joined the Occupy movement because I genuinely care about what the financial institutions are doing to the good people and the communities in this country. I think big corporate banks are the epitome of evil. However, I work for a big corporate bank. I enjoy a good salary and lots of perks, and I have no intention of stopping anytime soon. That's why my protesting outside of the great Satan Bank of America with a handmade sign felt, how should I say this, hypocritical? My presence in the center of McKeldin Square with a mic in my hand felt more like a performance than like a protest. And since I'm practiced in theater and in the spoken word, my performance was well received. Even though I spoke my truth passionately and honestly, I felt like an imposter. You see, I was the capitalist pig in the room of revolutionary socialists. But whenever I was in the room of capitalist pigs, I was the revolutionary socialist. It was a bit of a pickle to find myself in. I also realized quickly that I have no patience for the truly democratic process. Giving everyone a chance to voice their opinions individually made for a very, very long meeting where nothing really got decided. I found that even in the Occupy movement, there were natural leaders and natural followers. Some speakers inspired, some irritated. I'm not supposed to admit this, I know, but it's true, and I'm not the only one who noticed. Cliques developed, allegiances were formed, divides happened. It's human nature. I began to envision the state of the country that a total revolution in this way would make manifest, and it looked like chaos to me. I wasn't ready to commit to chaos. It was clear to me that immersion in the Occupy movement was not going to be the perfect fit for me, but I still wanted to support them because I believe at my core that they're correct about what needs to change. I joined a group called Be Heard, the Baltimore Higher Education Alliance for Real Democracy, and I participated in many stimulating educational programs and events that they put on. I joined with organized protests that were addressing specific issues that I could wholeheartedly throw my support into. There was a beautiful protest about the youth prison that Baltimore intended to build right next to the adult jail in the city. The idea of the protest was to build a little red schoolhouse and place it in the center of the fenced-off lot that would be the building site for the prison. Hundreds of us turned out despite frigid temperatures and lifted pieces of the makeshift school over a fence. 6 teachers climbed over to construct the schoolhouse. A piece of the roof was missing because we were stopped before we could get it all over the fence, but the teachers didn't mind. Baltimore City schools have been suffering from leaky roofs for years now, one teacher explained to the cheering crowd. The protesters inside the fence gathered in a circle and listened as one teacher read a passage from the writings of Frederick Douglass, who wrote that it's easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men. The school teacher read the day's lesson, and the protesters outside the fence repeated every word of what they said. It was wonderful to watch these loving people make their points so beautifully, despite the fact that they were surrounded by police in riot gear. The media wasn't there. They had been pushed back at least 4 blocks away so that they couldn't document the SWAT team coming in. No one but the protesters witnessed them forcibly removing the teachers as they sat outside the schoolhouse reading inspirational passages. It was a surreal experience to see loving, nonviolent people who cared being literally dragged off to jail. I wanted to join them, but I was worried I'd be late for work in the morning. Central booking, I'm told, takes 24 hours. The crowd chanted, "Who do you protect? Who do you serve, as the police did no more or less than their job? I was upset but deeply interested in the guards who stood expressionless with their weapons and protective gear as hundreds of strangers shouted at them, "Shame!" One guard was on the other side of the fence from where I was. I asked him what he felt about all this. I asked him if he believed the jail was the right thing. He said angrily, I would be surprised if he voiced his opinion. He revealed that he has friends who are in that jail right now. He admitted that he would have a lot to say about this youth prison, but that he would lose his job if he said it. Then he told me he had kids to take care of, and I heard him choke up a little bit. He was on our side, but he stood there with weapons against us. He believed as we did, but he went against those beliefs to keep food on the table for his family. I felt kinship with him, as I knew I was making compromises of my own. It gave me a great deal to think about, and I'm thinking about it still. It occurs to me that there is more than one kind of prison. Broken people can be found on either side of any fence. Should I do one more? One more? Okay. Should I do social media or football?
Football.
Has to be football, doesn't it? All right, this is timely. I never liked football. It reminded me of my father, who, it's fair to say, was a bit of a brute. It was my experiences with him during those changeover months when the soft liberation of summer gave in to the strict routine school days that made me develop visceral reactions to the sound of commentators and cheering crowds on TV. I watched my macho brothers bond with him over the sport, while my sensitive brother sat on the outside without any sign of camaraderie coming his way. I blamed the sport for indoctrinating boys into the idea that aggression and domination is the ultimate expression of what it means to be a man. I developed elaborate theories about how football was being used as a tool by the government to cultivate the mentality of nationalism and the taste for war. Throughout most of my life, I refused to participate. When I got married, another lifetime ago, my husband introduced me to his friends who were all young, healthy, straight men who had played and grown together since grade school. They were all handsome and funny like my husband, and they all loved football. So I started going to the pubs with them to watch the games, and it was great fun for a while, but the drinking was excessive, and there was very little awareness of the risks of getting behind the wheel. One Super Bowl Sunday, maybe 25 years ago, we lost a friend to a DUI. And I was once again sure that football was the root of all evil. I held fast to this belief, and it wasn't challenged again until I had a conversation with my brother-in-law some 8 years later. He was a unique combination of a man's man with a sensitive side, and he understood my reticence towards embracing the sport. He wanted me to see it through his eyes, so he described it in words that I could relate to. He knew that I was an actor at the time, and so he described the game in terms of a theater. The fans were the audience members who came not to bellow and fight, but to be carried away to another experience besides the ordinary workday. He showed me the plot twists, the dramatic arc of the game, and he made me realize that much like theater, football gave repressed people an opportunity to experience and express intense emotions as they put themselves in the place of those who were on the stage. Much like we theater people root for the star of the show and sneer at the villain, the fans of football root and sneer for their players. In that light, I began to understand the appeal of the game, but it wasn't until I came to Baltimore that I saw the power of it. I was working as a real estate agent when I moved here, and it became clear to me very early on that if I didn't know something about the Ravens, then I ran the risk of losing potential listings. They just didn't trust that you loved Baltimore if you didn't love the Ravens. And if you didn't love Baltimore, how could you possibly sell it to a stranger? There was a sound logic with that, what with The Wire being most of all what out-of-towners know of Baltimore. It was important to be able to sell the finer points to a potential buyer. So I tried to get up on my Ravens knowledge, but I made mistakes. Most recently, I called the quarterback Falco. Falco is the quarterback of the fictitious team in the film The Replacements, which a lot of my actor friends were in. It was obvious that I knew nothing and cared less, but the generous nature of the Baltimore people appreciated the fact that I was trying. Then something happened to create a true shift in me. Two things, actually. The first was when I was strolling down by the Inner Harbor. There were There, where high-rise corporate towers loom over the homeless in the street, you can see the best and the worst of this beautiful city. On the day in question, I wasn't looking for a reason to love people despite their obvious failings. I just stumbled onto one. An unfortunate soul was sitting on the curb in everyone's way and in obvious distress when a man in an expensive suit came out of his building and offered to help the poor guy get to his feet and over to a nearby church that might help him. I heard their fumbling conversation, how they groped in the chasm of their differences for some way to relate to each other, and I saw them find it when one of them mentioned the ravens. Suddenly they were not the rich and the poor, the healthy and the ill. Suddenly they were teammates. They walked with even strides as they engaged in a heated discussion about their beloved team. The suit patted the man on the shoulder as they parted ways. "Take care of yourself, man," he said, and the other man answered, "Yeah, you too." The second thing that happened was on a Friday when I was coming home from the DC area. I pulled onto the 395 ramp and took in the view of the Baltimore skyline. It was purple. Buildings were lit up and flags were hanging from windows. As I drove up Charles, I saw the streets were filled with people who were wearing purple, and I remembered, oh, the Ravens are playing. I wanted to be a part of it all. I wanted to root. I wanted to look at a stranger and smile because we were both rooting for the same thing. I wanted a beer and chicken wings. I wanted my city to be happy, and I knew that at least for a while they would be because of a silly game that has come to mean so much more to me than I ever imagined possible. Go Ravens.